Right, you're very welcome along to this week's episode of Keith Wood's State of the Union. Our guests this week are Stephen Rooney and Johne Murphy. We're here to talk essentially about the state of the club and amateur and schools game and how that interacts with the professional game. So we're well covered in that regard. Keith, I think everybody's going to be familiar with Johnny's playing career. His coaching career has begun to take off in the last number of years. But Stephen, maybe you might talk to us a little bit about what your role is with regards to club rugby in Ireland and how you got involved.
I was a player at Lansdowne, and then after retiring had nothing better to do, so I went off and became director of rugby in Lansdowne. So I've been doing that for over 10 years at this stage, and I suppose just of recently, myself and a few other guys representing sort of Leinster clubs have been in talks with the IRFU, together with our Munster counterparts and our Ulster and Connacht counterparts, just discussing the All-Ireland League and discussing, how it can evolve and maybe, change for the better.
Well, he underplays himself a little bit there, Ger. He was a particularly uncomfortable guy to play against, I would have said, back in the day, a long time ago. But also part of what this conversation is that when the game went professional 25 years ago, the clubs pretty much got left behind, and it was very interesting. We spoke last week with Philip Brown, and he gave a great insight into the security or lack therein of the game. But one of the big fallouts from the game going professional was that the IRFU took, which I still believe is the right decision, to go with the provinces, because they're the only ones with the critical mass to be able to make it into a professional game. And yet I would still have and come from the old idea where schools and club are essential for your improvement and your chance to become a rugby player. And we're still young in a professional sport, but 25 years of the clubs being kind of pushed a little bit out of the way all the time. And I know that Stevens is at the forefront to try and make certain that the club game is brought back up to a level of where it is properly substantial and a proper stepping stone for players that may not get in the academy system, but may kind of be a couple of years later, may get into be playing at a higher level again. But also for the fact that the ethos of the game is built with the schools and with the clubs. So that's the nature of this conversation too.
So Stephen, if I was to ask, what do you want? What's the answer to that? Like in an ideal world, what's the outcome for you as a representative of the clubs here in this conversation?
I think really the clubs are possibly just looking for a little more respect, more so than anything in that. All Ireland League Rugby at the minute, at Division 1 level, is a very good product. It's actually a really good standard of play. You've got a lot of young aspiring professionals in the league and that, and you go from week to week, and this is where sometimes the integrity of the league gets called into question, because you're sort of at the mercy of the professional outfits as to who might get released to you from week to week, and that, and they have their own agendas to follow, and everyone accepts that. But I think from a sponsorship point of view, from a club point of view, having a team which is loaded with 4 or 5 pros one week, and then the same club goes out and plays another team the following week, that doesn't really do the reputation of the league any good. So I think the league is there. The league has evolved, but in itself, it's a very entertaining product. The problem with Irish rugby is, there's only so many rugby games that a rugby fan can watch in one weekend, type of thing, and they'll watch their Pro 14 or their Heineken Champions Cup or whatever it may be, and sometimes the club game gets forgotten about that. So the club game needs to make itself a bit more relevant. It needs to work harder, I think, to sort of get more viewers, more people coming in the gates of the club, helping that, because it is an important part of Irish rugby. And if club rugby were to fall away, I think it would be very detrimental to all levels of rugby in the country. And so it just needs a bit more love, if you like.
Stephen, there's an issue here, and one of them, it's almost a philosophical question as to whether we want the game to just be a professional game. And look, I was fortunate to play in the amateur time and play in the professional time, but also that the nature of rugby, it shouldn't be about 150 professional players in Ireland. It needs to be about what it gives you as a child in school, what it gives you is a sense of community, a sense of camaraderie. So we have a lot of kids playing, a lot of kids stopping playing at 18 or 19, partly because there isn't maybe a pathway. You don't have to be a pathway to play an international or a professional. You don't need to be a professional. But we played the game because we absolutely bloody loved it. You know, there was something fantastic about the game to play, and it was very exciting for us. And we have friends, and we'll have friends for life because of it, both from school. We had a 30 years reunion of my school team, and we met up just before Christmas, and it was fantastic. And I remember them from school, but they're not the memories you have. The memories you have are actually playing rugby and going on the trips with them, and getting to know them and getting to understand what team and self-belief and discipline and all those attributes that you get from rugby are. But if the game below professional gets sidetracked completely, I think we miss a huge trick in what makes the game great. So we accept the game has to be professional, but there's an awful lot more than just professional rugby.
Yeah, I just 100% agree with you. You know, that there's, you know, as I say, the friendships, like rugby clubs form a big part of their communities. You know, the club network that is there is hugely important. Guys, you know, like getting on with life or just supporting guys in hard times, and that's all, you know, hugely important. You know, but you know, everyone plays rugby. Like what I'd hate to see is that rugby sort of club rugby become, you know, gets more and more insignificant and ultimately fades away, and then we have some sort of American football type scenario where nobody plays rugby after school other than the professionals, and you know, that would be, you know, as I say, I think that would be hugely detrimental to what's going on. I like at the minute you have some very good academy systems in Ireland. Leinster's, it probably has, you know, like is the shining light, but there are a lot of players like that have come through club rugby that, you know, have come through a difficult route where they didn't, for whatever reason or not, they don't get picked up by the Leinster Academy, and they you know, they have a different route, and club rugby can provide that route. And you know, I think if you listen to the guys like Noel McNamara from the Leinster Academy, and he speaks very highly of the value of club rugby in terms of preparing his under-20 squad, and you know, giving them, sort of hardening these guys up and giving them the experience at a higher, faster level that, you know, they haven't had previous to that.
I think that's really important in the sense that I know from experience in the school game that there are already a certain amount that don't go forward and play. And under 20s is a fantastic brand of rugby, and is really, really enjoyable because you're out in the wider world for your first time, and there's a freedom associated to that, and it can be really, really enjoyable. But I think the main fall off for guys is because some of them might already know that, well, look, I'm probably not going to be professional, but they don't feel that there's probably an attractive enough level for them to play at because of how kind of teenagers and young adults are. They don't see the club game as an attractive level or essentially an attractive product to play in because there's not a huge amount of publicity attached to it. And for kids that are in their senior cup, you know, in their senior cup squad panel of 28, 30, however each school do it, they're a part of this some 2-3 month journey that they're in the papers. They're, you know, it's been spoken about on social media, but they know that, well, this is it, because this is going to be, you know, the peak. Where if the club game was a really attractive product and it was seen more and it was out there more, I think they'd have more people continue to play because they're, oh, well, okay, well, that's fine. I might not be a pro, but look, geez, I can play this fantastic level and I can play week in, week out I can pit myself against the guys who are going to be professional because they're playing in it when they're not picked for their provinces. I think that's something that there's a trick being missed there, because ultimately we're losing people playing rugby. And whatever level you play, and I say this to all my sixth years when they leave, I'd love to look back in 10 years' time and everyone in this room still be playing, whatever level. It doesn't matter, because rugby gives you values, but it also gives you opportunities at every level. Whether you play for, in Lansdowne, the Killer Seas or whatever, you know, that those teams that might be the fifths or sixths in the club, but you're having a beer on a Friday night and you're looking for a job after college at 24, 25, someone might give you a job. It creates opportunities, not just in rugby, but outside of rugby. And I think that's really, really important. And it's to keep giving them that opportunity, that it is an attractive, ultimately it's an attractive product for them to keep playing.
I know it's a different time, and it was a different time. But Garryowen were the route for me to play for Ireland. So I played for Ireland before I played a competitive match for Munster. And it was on the back of performances that we had in the All-Ireland League, because it was, you know, pretty much at its height, or a lot of the 90s was the height of the AIL. But the reason I loved club rugby was I was a front row forward. So that idea of learning your craft, of what to do, of how to scrummage, it's impossible to learn that without playing matches. And for me, that's one of the issues that we have with the academy system. I'd still like to see the players play more rugby. I mean, obviously you need to get them bigger, stronger, and have to be able to take what's going to come down the track when they're going to play at a higher level. But actually, the idea of playing and knowing that you play against a gnarly guy who's 32 or 3 years of age, who knows every trick in the book, and you're 18 or 19, and you have to learn them. You know, and if you don't, you know, it's the best education that you can actually have.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those young players, like that, I mean, they have these development programs, and they're great development programs, all mapped out by their academy coaches and everything. But that really needs to be supported by meaningful rugby game time. You know, ultimately, you know, it's great developing a guy, but you know, there's no substitute for experience, and that is what the All-Ireland League can give you. You know, you've got these young lads going up against men who, as you say, have been around the block and you know, as I say, know every trick in the book and that. So it's a really important part of their development, and you know, like it does work. Like you've got Ronan Keller, who's now you know, pulling up trees and whatever. A little over a year ago, he was playing All-Ireland League rugby. So you know, particularly for front row forwards as well, it makes a huge amount of sense for these guys to be sort of, you know, training or learning their craft, if you like.
And
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know enough about the Keller situation. How did that come about, and why does that not happen more? Why does everybody not get a set amount of game time in the IAL?
Look, ultimately, you know, this is for the pro guys to really, you know, explain to you. But like ultimately, they, you know, their priority, Leo Cullen's priority as a Leinster coach is his next Pro 14 game or preparing for the next Heineken Champions Cup game. The All-Ireland League, as much as he is quite supportive of it, but it's not what he gets paid to do. Okay, so like he has to prepare his team, and you know, Leinster in particular would have a huge amount of international call-ups. So what, you know, if you look at the amount of players that Leinster have given debuts to, which is all brilliant, and that is, you know, is fantastic. They bring through the young players quite quickly, and it's really good to see. What really would annoy a lot of the clubs and things is where you've got a young lad who's maybe been 24th man for the last 3 Pro 14 games, because you know they need the cover there. That's what they need, and as a result, that guy hasn't hasn't been on a rugby pitch in 4 or 5 weeks. You know, which is, as I say, you know, that's the kind of thing that you want to avoid. And you know, I think part of the discussions that I've been involved with, you know, have been, you know, they've been very positive. Collie McEntee from the IRFU has been, you know, basically trying to come at it a little bit differently from his predecessors, and really, you know, is a big follower of the club game and a big believer in the club game, and he's trying to get everyone to kind of, you know, get a bit of compromise going, so that both the club game and the professional game can benefit from a lot of these younger players getting more game time in the AAL. And and the AAL will improve and will be a better product as a result. It'll be more attractive for people to come and watch and that. So there's been some very positive discussions there, but sorry, Keith.
No, there's a structural component to this, Stephen. So if it's considered that the IRFU need the club game, they then need to tidy up the structure of it, because it went to a stage at about 10 or 12 years ago where it was the All-Ireland League all over the whole country for virtually every club that had played rugby. That's not good enough. That's just spreading that senior capacity across the line, whereas you do need to have it some way heightened up into the higher levels to try and have a standard that actually fits, where you get more player into those ones, and then you have proper provincial club competitions underneath that. So there needs to be something consistent that works. It doesn't have to be 10 months of the year. It just needs to be something that's very consistent. But it also fills a hole that doesn't happen. So when you stream a huge amount of kids into academies, everybody else is left behind. You do need to make certain that they have a route through as well. And guys mature at different stages, and we know it. And Johnny, you know that an awful lot. And I think we need to talk a little bit about the schools game as well. But because we can see within the Leinster system, we are just churning out players of quality. Huge numbers every year, and actually they're beginning to spread all over the world now at the present moment in time. What is Leinster doing so right, or what are the Leinster schools doing so right at the present moment in time?
Well, I think in that regard, there's a lot of there's a huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes from a Leinster perspective, particularly in this area from 16s up. So they have summer programs, but they have programs that run all year long that are different to when I was playing, and that they now have a real focus on the youths in Leinster. That Trevor Hogan is ahead of that. He's the talent identification officer. Phil Lawler is the head of the domestic game in Leinster, and they have now an elite youth program that stay together and train as a squad all year, all season long. They're not in rugby playing schools. They also have another squad underneath that also play games throughout the season. They don't train as much as the elite guys. I think they're called the YSU. But they're being graded each area, and how you get into the YSP. Sorry, it's YSP. How you get into the YSP is you're being looked at from under 16. So when you come out of third year, you're being looked at, but every area, so the North Midlands, East Midlands, all those areas in Leinster, I think there's 7, are looking at between, I think, about 80 or 90 kids in that age group. They then get filtered. They go into a program where there's about 200 kids from under 16s, and 17s, and then that's developed when they're 18 and 19 into these elite squads. But there's still 70 or 80 youth players being looked at consistently over the whole way. But when you have 100 kids, 150, 200 kids in each area being looked at under 16, they're nearly looking at, between the Shane Horgan competitions, they're nearly consistently looking at, I don't know, 600, 700, 800 kids through, each year, and they then develop forward. But how they're developed then is that the YSP will then play all the top school side. And I think this year, I think the only team to beat the YSP, I think, was St. Michael's. And I could be correct in that, but they beat, they played Blackrock, they played Michael's. They were all really, really tight games. So they're playing the elite schools level, where historically, when I was playing, say my school team, Newbridge College, would have played the Leinster Youths, and it would have been a close game. But that was the overall Leinster Youths. It's developed so much more, and they have, the YDOs are going into youth development officers. They're now going into developing schools. They're going into clubs. Every club in Leinster will have a CCRO, a community club officer, rugby development officer, that will also go into 3 or 4 schools, even into primary schools, secondary schools. So they're looking at absolutely every area. And I've had conversations with a few people, and they said that their job isn't done until they have maybe a professional rugby player from Tala, or a professional rugby player from inner city Dublin, or a non-playing rugby area. So that's ultimately their goal. Now, each province is different in how they approach it, and each province should be different, because one shoe doesn't fit all. So it's like Munster, I think, should be more youth based and have around the clubs, because there's only a few kind of there's not the same amount, but maybe doing a county rugby team similar enough to splitting them out. Leinster are doing it, splitting them into areas by each county, and having a county rugby officer that starts looking at kids and developing the programs through the CCR program. But again, it's very difficult to do, because people are now trying to copy what Leinster are doing. But that doesn't fit everywhere, because they don't have the same population, don't have the same playing numbers.
But from that, Johnny, what percentage of those guys are getting through to getting Leinster contracts, senior contracts?
Oh, there's only a small percentage. The percentage is still the same.
So this is something that's going to pay dividends, that Leinster would hope in 5, 6, 10 years' time, that this is a pathway that's built up within it. And I know Munster are doing something similar, albeit on a much smaller scale with it. But for me, I wanted to go back onto the schools component part of it. So the senior schools in Leinster have very professional coaching staffs. There's a lot of money invested within that side of it. But the amount of players that are coming out of that system there's huge numbers every year.
Yeah, well, I'm in Newbridge College. Our program, some people won't like me saying it, but our players are essentially professional rugby players for 9 months of the year, built around school time. So they'll have 3 weight sessions. They'll be in for weights in the morning at 7:00 on a Monday morning. There could be a review potentially during the day or before, or we have remote reviewing capacity and huddle, so I can tag a game and send clips to individual players. We'll train on a Monday afternoon. Monday morning, then Tuesday morning they'll have weights again. We could have another review during the day. We'll be back on the pitch. Wednesday they'll be off. Thursday then we'll weights again, more rugby, team run, play Saturday. And that's essentially, it's built around, like, we've a physio that's he's not full time, but he's a past pupil, but they can call at any stage. We have a strength and conditioner, full-time strength and conditioner, that looks after the whole school, and he does hockey as well. We have, I suppose I'd be classed as a full-time employee from a rugby perspective, and then I have a forwards coach, a defence coach. The juniors the same. The juniors have an attack defence coach, and each year has individual coaches, head coaches, assistants through the whole way. Like, we have our current second years, there's 5 coaches, 3 external out of the 5, 2 externals in first year with 3 or 4 members of staff. TY is all external, 2 external coaches at TY. The SET is, there's only 1 member of staff, and the others are all external coaches. So that's the level, and you're essentially running a professional program within a school, and there's a pathway for 6 years.
Within that system, are many of those volunteer? Are they all?
Oh no, they are. Yeah, there's all are being paid. If you're a staff member, then there's obviously a small bursary on top that you can get, but there's a pro rata for each session, and then there'd be one or two that would be above that would be essentially full time.
It's an extraordinary system.
And like we're not like, we have to, like, we don't have a full-time director of rugby. There's 4 or 5 of those in other schools. We are moving to that, but it's going to take a length of, a period of time. But yeah, like we are not where we should be, and we've done reviews during COVID to show that, and we're still not where we need to be if we want to repeat what we did this year and continue that way. So yeah, we'd be classed as probably a development professionals, a development program, in the sense that we're trying to develop to reach where Michael's, Blackrock, Gonzaga to a certain extent, Mary's have a full-time DOR, and to really try and push where they are.
And does the school finance the whole thing independently, or do Leinster or the IRFU pay anything along the way?
It's independent. There's some stuff, fundraisers in terms of past pupils, and that would be involved, but it's part of the school that pay for that.
It's handy for Leinster to have such an academy system, handing them players at 17 and 18.
Yeah, they do help. Like, you can get as much help as you want, but it's not, they don't, like, so we've run testing days where Leinster have come in and seen where we're at. They have our data compared to other schools that they were allowed into. They'll drop in terms of your medical protocols. Anything that you want from a Leinster perspective is there, but they don't have any direct funding. It's support. And I actually think that that's something that could be really helpful in the club game as well, is that provincial support being released to the clubs as well. But again, it's manpower to an extent.
Stephen, right, saying you don't have teams kind of in the age group for players who would be playing in schools. Is that true about most rugby clubs?
Traditionally that was always the case with Leinster clubs. Now it's changed a fair bit in the last while. You've seen a lot of Dublin clubs are sort of trying to expand their youth sections, but if you're in an SCT squad and you may not be playing first rugby, you could never pull on a jersey for the first team in school. But you're named in that SCT squad, then you're not allowed to play with your club. You're not allowed to play club rugby for that period of time, which can be a frustration for a lot of guys, and it's certainly a frustration for some of the clubs where you've done a job in sort of bringing these guys up from under 8s through to probably under 13s or so, and then they go missing for 3 or 4 years, and probably that connection that they have with the club is, I wouldn't say broken, but it's certainly weakened considerably. So there's less when these guys come out of school, then that they feel less part of the club. So that's just that's an offshoot of this kind of very sophisticated school system that Leinster clubs have.
There is a school's youth designated time frame, but that's generally in TY, where you can play a school's youth side. But as Rue said, for instance, I had 3 TYs in my squad, in my training squad. Now, I think one was a starter, but the other 2 probably accumulated a small amount of game time, and only in friendlies, but would have been with us for 3 months of the year. He wasn't allowed to play for his club, regardless of whether I wanted him to or not. He's just not allowed. And if he did play, and then there'd be repercussions from a obviously rules and regulations standpoint. But in my opinion, he should be allowed play. I think it should be, they would be able to. Now, it's an administration issue to be fair, that if he wasn't involved in my 23, that he was allowed play school's youth Saturday or Saturday or Sunday, he should be allowed to play on a Sunday with his club if he wanted to. But there is a huge amount of administration, because every rugby playing school has to send in those every week then, you know.
And there is that sort of situation goes on in Munster. It is actually one of the, I would say, fallout elements from the game going professional as well. There was a bit of a change in terms of different elements with that. I love the association with the club, although I didn't start with Garryowen until I left St. Munchin's, and they then became my club going forward afterwards. But maybe there could be a sort of end of season competition, or a sevens competition, or something that keeps the link. So the idea of building up a guy from 5 or 6 years of age to going to school at 12 or 13 and then not seeing him for 4 or 5 years, there's something inherently wrong in that. But more so than that, actually, the big issue is we should never say no to a kid playing rugby.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah.
if a kid is in a squad and he can't get into the team, but he's a good player, and some of these teams have got 25 good players, 30 good players, so he could be very, very good. There has to be a route. There has to be not just one rule that covers everything. You should never say no to a kid going to play rugby at any stage. And at times we've had issues with that in Munster in a big way. So guys are trying to leave clubs because they don't have a team at under 15 or under 16, and they'd like to go and play there, but they often don't get allowed to go and play. You can't move clubs until you're 18. You can go on loan. So there's issues with all of that side of it as well. So I do think that, again, a lot of that comes from leadership. A lot of that comes from the IRFU directing what it actually wants to be done. And a lot of cases, especially for the club game, it's been left on its own. It hasn't become something that's been central. And in terms of the schools, if the schools keep churning out the players at the amount that they're doing, you know, and the schools parents are paying for it, they don't really need to worry about that either. They don't want to kind of mess with too much there, because an awful lot of quality is coming through the school system.
I think the other byproduct of the school system, and sorry, it's a good problem to have, is but you have a lot of kids coming out of school who are very good rugby players. You know, particularly, you know, we've spoken about the Leinster clubs and that, or Leinster schools, but as Johnny says, the reality is only a very small percentage of these guys will make it through into the academies and hopefully on to professional careers after that. Now, you know, there's probably, you know, quite a significant percentage that ultimately could be good enough to play, you know, to play higher at a higher level, but for whatever reason they don't get the letter from the Leinster Academy getting them in. So all of a sudden their hopes are dashed, and they just turn away from rugby completely. And that's where the clubs can really sort of step in and help these guys and get them back, you know, back on a route. And, you know, like certainly, you know, Lansdowne amongst lots of other clubs have seen, you know, guys take a more indirect route towards professional rugby, because I mean ultimately I would imagine the IRFU want as big a base of players to pick their national teams from as they can. So if you've got young guys with potential giving up because, you know, the Leinster kind of door has been shut on them or whatever, then, you know, that's not going to serve the game very well going forward either. So, you know, it's you know, I think it's an issue. It's another reason why, you know, the club rugby needs to be there and you know, to help these guys, you know, push.
Would you see a national under-21s competition, club competition? Would you see that as being a stepping stone, either to reignite your love of the game and maybe copper fasten an association with the club, or it might give you the extra little bit of rugby that you could play after school, something to aim for?
Well, you've got the Fraser McMullen Cup, which is under 20s. Now you have to qualify for that. You have to kind of come through your provincial league and qualify through it. Ulster don't participate in it. Connacht are part of the Leinster under 20 setup. So, you know, to be honest, it's usually dominated by probably 3 or 4 teams in Leinster. You know, I think the reality is that the All-Ireland League, the age profile in the All-Ireland League is very young. So it's come down hugely since you or I ever, you know, were playing. So a lot of the guys that are playing are sort of anywhere between 19 and 23, 24. The guys, the 30-year-olds playing are less and less, and I think that's probably I don't think that's peculiar to Ireland alone. I think that's just the nature of the sport and natures of economies and things like that. But I think to separate the under 21s from the AAL, possibly there's merit in having the competition, but I think if you focus this and channel these young players through into the All Ireland League itself, you'll be achieving that. But to have, for the guys that don't quite make it there, I think the under 20s competitions are brilliant, because it takes guys a while to develop and to find their feet. In school, the school system is very professional. Everything's laid out to the players on a plate like that. They don't even really have to think about it. Almost, it's all there. Whereas school at clubs level, all of a sudden you become an adult. You've got to do a bit of growing up. You've got to take on a bit more responsibility yourself. Sometimes it takes guys a bit of time to manage that.
And I think that is something that the actual clubs themselves can manage, is that, have an emphasis on under 20s and make it clear that their protocols are that if you're not picked for the AIL side, then you play with your peer group for 2 years, which is under 20s. And it affords you to grow a bit more, playing a really good standard. Like, I think the Premier 20s in Leinster certainly, they would have the capability of competing probably at Division 2A in terms of AIL standard. I think the physicality would probably get the better of them over a period of the season. But I do think it's important for a guy who still has a bit of development to go, that knows that if he's not good enough to play AIL, well, that's fine. On a Sunday, I'm going to be playing with my mates who are the same age, similar enough size, and I'm having really good crack. So it's a way of keeping that level, that age group of guys coming forward, where if he can go into J1s or even J2s, he's playing against adults, and that can get a small bit fed up with that, because he's essentially losing contact with his mates. So I think that is something that the club themselves could take responsibility for, that it's, their rules, for the want of a better word, or if you're not picked in the AIL squad, well, away you go and you play 20s, play with your mates for the weekend.
Yeah.
So sorry, Premier 20s is obviously the under 20s. Who does every club have an under 20 team, and they would play in the Premier 20 league? Is that
no, you kind of qualify and then it's ranked. But yeah, most teams will have and will try their very best, and then it's ranked like any AIL competition or any Leinster competition. So Premier, Div 1, Div 2, and so on.
Okay, but your junior teams would tend to pick up players who want to play senior rugby, who don't make the senior team, and they would tend to go to the junior team as opposed to the under 20s, because you've outgrown it in some ways. Yeah,
and then junior clubs also try and have like the local, Newbridge, they have an under 20s. Kildare in our local area have under 20s. They play in a cup competition, but also have the potential to qualify into the main 20s league. So there is opportunity for 18, 19, 20-year-olds to play together for 2 years at their level. It's just to make sure that the clubs are allowing them to do that, and not necessarily playing against J1s or J2s who are adults.
Steve, again, pardon my ignorance here. Are there players who are semi-professional playing in the IAL, and how many semi-professionals would there be? How do they get financed?
So the league itself is an amateur league. Okay, so the only guys that are officially getting paid are the guys who are with the different academies, or who are they're development players, or young guys in the provinces who for one reason or another aren't getting games, or maybe coming back from injury. So then you've also then got a mix of kind of guys who've hung up their boots professionally and are back, and maybe they've kind of realigned with their club and they're trying to kickstart their career. So for example, Mark Flanagan joined us last season, having played in the UK and then having played with Leinster and Munster in Ireland and that, and he's come back and he's an engineer now. So there's a it's a good mix of talent, but like the league itself, the RFU are very strict on it. It's strictly speaking is an amateur league. Whether everybody adheres to that or not, that's a whole other debate. But
okay,
one of the parts on that I would have always said was a joy as a young guy. So it's a long time since I played All-Ireland League, and I started when I was 19 playing All-Ireland League. And but if you looked around the room, you had bankers, you had builders, you had accountants, you had students, you had engineers, you had people in every walk of life. And it was one of the great things you say about Limerick, that it was everybody played. It was a game for everybody. It wasn't elitist at all. And what was a joy within that changing room was that you had different perspectives. I mean, it was about independent thought. Everybody viewed it differently. So one of the issues when you go into, I'm going to say a Leinster school that is at that level of organisation, that this is how things are done, which is brilliant for enhancing an athlete and bringing an athlete to a higher level, is that if you bypass the club side, you bypass different opinions. You bypass different ways of doing things. This is a regimented view of doing it. We do want independent thinkers in it as much as possible. And actually, that's where a lot of kids fall by the wayside leaving school. Everything isn't laid on for them. And some don't like that. But some thrive in it, and some suddenly have an awful lot more to offer when they come out at the end of it. It's something that the clubs actually do give a lot. We're getting close towards the end of this. How has the lockdown, how has that affected both the school and the club? If we go club first, Stephen, how much pressure are you under?
I think it's put a huge financial strain on clubs all around the country. So essentially since March, when all rugby activities ceased and whatever, all your revenue and your streams of revenue, whether they be match gates or whether they be bar revenue or whether they be events that you run in the clubhouse and whatever, that's all just completely gone. It's a rugby club. It's not a business that puts money aside, whatever. So clubs probably have a little bit of short-term finance that they can get them through. And you've seen I think there's a lot of GoFundMe pages up with various different clubs reaching out to their members and their diaspora or whatever to try and get them through what's a difficult financial time. But I think, to be honest, I think the whole COVID thing brings a lot of opportunity, because amateur club rugby is obviously sort of suffering, but professional rugby has come to a standstill as well. There's a huge question mark over what games can be played and what competitions can be run. So, is the Celtic Cup going to happen this year? If the Celtic Cup doesn't happen, I think it's a great opportunity for the clubs and the professional setups to maybe forge a kind of closer and stronger relationship. And these guys who need rugby, these young players who would normally play in the Celtic Cup, and that's at least 8 games of their season, that would provide them with some meaningful sort of proper rugby, in order to hone their skills and help prep them for whatever lies ahead of them. So I always try and look at the opportunities and things, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I say all it needs, and that's something you can do without any added expense. I don't know what it costs to field a Celtic Cup set a team or a match or whatever, but I know that the infrastructure with the All Ireland is already there, so that the cost is barely zero. So I think that's, for me, that if that comes to pan out or whatever, that some of these pro competitions are, as I say, getting cancelled or whatever, and pro rugby players need rugby, then the clubs can step in and provide that. And I think, as Johnny spoke about, maybe there's an opportunity then for the professional coaches to come in and liaise with the clubs and show, well, this is how we'd approach doing this or whatever, and just bring their knowledge to bear and pass it down to the clubs. I mean, that there are the coaches have a lot of, or the clubs have a lot of good coaches as it is, but everyone can learn more. Everyone can learn how to do things better. So sorry, I'm rattling on a bit, but that's it's a difficult time though. And everyone, nobody's sort of avoiding, everybody's health is absolutely paramount. So clubs won't be going back until it's absolutely safe for everybody to do that. But we want to make sure that there are clubs to go back to. I know the professional game has taken huge hits on that, but I would imagine there'll be some clubs around the country that simply just won't survive this, or if they do, it'll be because there's been a huge amount of work from the members in that. So it's difficult.
From a school perspective, it remains to be seen, based on obviously fees and probably how the whole thing is going to affect the economy as a whole. Really, I suppose one of the added extras and a lot of why parents choose private schools is the extracurricular activities that can be afforded to for their kids and the varying options that they have. So I think it's important that it does go forward. For us at the moment, we are planning. I've been in constant contact with next year's group. They're on a break now, and they'll start again, probably remotely on their own in July, and we'll plan from them. But we're in a bit of a holding pattern. But as is for us, I think overall the private school sector is probably just going to have to wait and see how it is really affected in terms of in terms of numbers. And I suppose the principals that have been through the previous recession a couple of years ago probably have an idea of where things have to get managed and that. But from our side, we're trying to continue on as normal and trying to keep the lads active. I think following on from what Rue said in terms of the club stuff, it's really important that the club is ultimately it's a community asset, and I think that it is supported. And I think clubs, if they have walkways and they have different things, the opportunity to open the facilities up for the local people can also bring in new members. Obviously all done in a really safe way and under government guidelines, but the opportunity for the clubs of all sports to show off what facilities they have and that to show that they really are there for the community, and without the community they won't be there anymore. So I think it is really important that when they can and when it's safe, that every club tries to show off the facilities that they have and try and get the community out and active. And I think that's one of the big things, the amount of activity that has happened and people are way more active. Hopefully this will, and I suppose the weather plays a huge amount in that, but hopefully this will be a kind of a catalyst for people that haven't tried sports to try them, to pick them up, all sports. And I think that hopefully that can be a positive out of it, that our society as a whole is going to be more active. And you see Australia, how active they are, but also their volunteerism doesn't drop and people are engaged at clubs and they drive things forward in their community. So hopefully we can follow suit there.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. Keith, I'll give the last word to you on this. How hopeful are you that the right blend of relationship between the elite amateur game, the amateur game, and the professional game can be found?
I don't think it's been found in the last 10 years, actually. I think some parts of it have gone well. I think we are getting a lot of players through different systems, but not through all systems. I think if you were to look at rugby, traditionally, it was built on clubs, schools, and the international team. And so for that, you could put in the professional game for it is now. but it still needs to be clubs, schools, and professional rugby. And at the present moment in time, the clubs are not getting enough love. There isn't enough structure for them to be able to build on top of it. I think it's a very difficult time at the present moment in time. I do take Stephen's point of view that if certain things are changed because of competitions that can't be played, can the clubs fill that hole? And if they fill that hole, why wouldn't they be filling that all the time going forward? So I think there is a route for it, but it requires people to get around the table to make that route work and happen. In terms of the schools, what Leinster are doing is truly extraordinary. I didn't want to ask on air exactly what you think your budget would be for your school program, because I think that would be a bit harsh. But I'd love to have that discussion again, because I know that in lots of schools, in St. Munchin's, my own school, for example, which is not a fee-paying school, they don't pay their coaches at all, actually. So there isn't a professional program that's set in there. They still do pretty well. They have a couple of junior cups over the last few years, and they're very keen on not paying them. They actually love the idea of this being a volunteer and of a teacher-driven system. But that's a particular system as well, and who's to say that's right, wrong, or indifferent, or that Johnny's is. But there does need to be more done to try and help all the schools in the different areas that are not done on a fee-paying model to be able to promote higher standards within those schools, and support would have to come from the RFU for that. So we had Philip Brown on last week, and Philip Brown is saying, well, without the professional game, we don't have anything to do with the amateur game. We're struggling very, very heavily. So I think it's a difficult number of years ahead of us. But the only way ever through any of that level of difficulty is talk, is conversation. Get around the table and see what can actually happen. And you're going to lose something. I mean, they say the art of compromise is that absolutely nobody is happy. The clubs will lose something, the schools might lose something, the RFU might lose something. None of them might be happy with it, but it may be a workable system going forward.
Right. On that note, our guests this week were Stephen Rooney and Johne Murphy. Another Keith Woods State of the Union is in the books. Hopefully it has provoked some conversation anyway. We'll see you next week. Thanks a million.